Because our next guest, we're not going to subject him to Phillies talk, right?
No, absolutely not.
Okay,
no, he's a specialist.
I mean, we respect Keith Pompey way more than that.
He's the primary Sixers beat writer for the Philly Inquirer.
Absolutely.
He does the Locked On Sixers podcast. He's also at Pro Hoops Writers VP. He does wears a lot of hats. You got to follow him on
Senior
Twitter.
Senior VP. Whenever you have those type of titles surrounding you,
It's
you're
executive.
a big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
At Pompey on Sixers on Twitter.
Keith, how you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm doing well. How you guys doing?
Doing great, man. Trying to process what was a wild Sunday night in free agency, and really just sort of as the smoke sort of clears, trying to figure out what exactly happened with the Sixers and Jimmy Butler, and how did he end up in Miami in a sign and trade and not in Philadelphia?
It's tough. There's always two sides to a story, but I kind of think that at the end of the day, both sides probably agreed that it was best for him. You have to, because, my opinion is, everybody's saying he turned down 5 years, 190. I can't see anyone doing that.
No, I can't either.
Yeah, and I think that it's one of those things where, Miami's a place that he identified early that he wanted to go to. I'm talking about even before he came here. There was talk that, he wanted to go there. They wanted him. So I think that it was one of those things where, if you could get Al Horford and you can get Josh Richardson, who some people say is a poor man's Jimmy Butler, do it.
Well, what about and I understand that, and I think when you look at how the whole thing plays out from the contract standpoint and the money, it totally makes sense, Keith. I'm curious, now that you have the benefit of hindsight, being around this team, being around Jimmy, knowing the people you deal with in the front office as well, was there a moment or maybe a time in the season that you can go back and say, yeah, that was probably ground zero for this?
Nah, you can't really. Because, this whole thing is, if you look at it, the whole thing was fluid. You know what I mean? Jimmy comes in, he hits a game winner. He has 2 game winners, I think, in his first 5 games or 7 games. And then, he goes and then he's getting 5 shots. And then when the playoffs come, it's one of those things where, he was the best player. I know Joel Embiid is the man or, whatever, but you can arguably say that Jimmy Butler was the best player on the team in the playoffs. So it was a tough thing. It's like hot and cold. It's like, what do you it's like, how are you last remembered? So, for someone to say, oh, Jimmy's definitely coming back and Jimmy's not, it's hard to say that. I think what happens is, you get so far removed from the season, people have, on both sides, they probably have time to sit down and think about it. And they come to the conclusions that they want to after that. But during the season, it was so hot and cold.
Hey, Keith, you brought up a couple of game-winning situations with Jimmy Butler with the ball in his hand at the end of the game. Now, with this new configuration of a starting 5 and what we think it will be, you got Tobias, of course, Joel and Ben. You got now Richardson, and then Al Horford would be your starting 5. Who is that guy at the end of games now?
I don't know. That's to be determined. You would say in the past it would have been Embiid, but right now, you may say you would like to see Tobias Harris step up and see what he can do. Because when he was in the Clippers, it was one of those things where he was kind of like that guy. But right now, you got so many new faces. You want to see how they get along, how they play together. But right now, I think that's going to be tough for the Sixers to replace, because you're having guys who are trying to get there, where that Jimmy was exactly there, and he was one of the league's best players in regards to closing out. So, I think that's the biggest question mark for the Sixers right now is who's going to be that guy. Al Horford, you hear that he's that type of player. But typically, me personally, I think a lot of the times, closeout guys tend to be guards, because they're people who can, have the ball in their hands. you don't have to worry about somebody giving them an outlet pass or doing certain things. They have the ball in their hands. So I kind of think that it could be Tobias. We don't know about Josh yet. Ben Simmons, he has some work to do on his game before he gets to that level.
Keith, I wonder if for the other 3.5 quarters, right, before we start getting down to that crunch time that Harry asked you about, are we going to see, especially with the departure of J.J. Redick, are we going to see Tobias Harris and maybe even a guy like Richardson take on more of a volume role, maybe Harris first? And maybe not every single night so much because we still have Embiid and Horford who can not only get buckets down low but shoot. But would you expect, at the very least, how this team is assembled today, that Tobias Harris would take on more of a volume role when it comes to outside shots?
Oh, it's going to be Tobias. It has to be Tobias. I mean, like right now, Al Horford is a great addition, but Tobias is making $180 million.
It's a good answer.
Tobias is going to be that. He has to be that guy. Tobias is one of those things where, he was the third option, fourth option, fifth options on certain nights. Right now you have to say to yourself that, Tobias, you're going to be a guy that we're going to get, more involved in the offense. You're going to be looked upon as the savior, so to speak. Now again, is a role that he had when he was with the Clippers. But now, he is $180 million man, and he's going to be looked upon to save the day a lot.
Hey, Keith, we're talking with Keith Pompey from the Philly Inquirer. Follow him on Twitter, @Pompey on Sixers. Obviously, they've still got a couple of holes, in the roster. They don't have a whole lot of money to spend. What do you anticipate them doing over these next couple of days or weeks?
Right now, here it is. I think that their goal is to get a backup point guard, but they only have $2 million available. And when you look at a guy like T.J. McConnell, of course they have his right. They can give him more than the minimum if he wants to stay, unless you go out there and you give a guy a mid-level exception or something like that. But, right now they need to go out there and they need to find a backup point guard. I mean, that's like number one. They always said they wanted to get post players. Well, you got Al Horford, you have Kyle O'Quinn, who is kind of like, a steady backup, a rugged guy who can come in and, and do some things as a role player for you. You also have Mike Scott. So right now, the goal has to be get a backup point guard.
What's the discussion this year about Brett Brown, do you think, Keith? From anywhere, from people like yourself covering the team to idiots on the radio like us to fans to social media. You know how it's going to be, where there's going to be discussion, hot seat, all of that. But you still have the core guys in Simmons and Embiid. You've got Harris back, but you've added Horford, another component or two, and Josh Richardson. Do you expect Brett Brown to do anything different, or pretty much stay the course and how he's been coaching for the past couple of years?
I mean, it looks like when you look at how they have Tobias and Josh and everything, Richardson and Al, I mean, it looks like it's going to be kind of like what he used to do. I mean, I can see him trying to, do things. Now, again, they're not going to have J.J. Redick, but I can see him trying to, run the same things. Now he has defensive players who kind of fit the system that he wants to fit. And for him, that's a bonus. The only thing is now that the pressure is just going to be so much higher for Brett. It always has been. But, in the past, everyone was saying, well, let's wait until we get this roster. Let's wait till we make these moves, and it's going to be one of those things where now it's like they have the roster. They made the moves. This is the team moving forward. And I think from that standpoint, there's going to be more pressure on Brett Brown.
Hey, Keith, obviously it's a lot of money for Horford at his age of 33. We might be really, regretting this contract in years 3 or 4, but in the interim, I think he's going to have a really good effect on Joel Embiid. What do you think that might be?
I mean, the thing is, here's the thing about it. Everybody says he's going to have a really good effect on Joel Embiid, which is true. But also, Joel Embiid is like a two-time All-Star. He's the face of the franchise, all NBA. You know what I mean? Now, the one effect that he may have is kind of sort of like, okay, Joe, this is how I work. This is things like that. He'll probably be a better practice partner for Joel because Joel hasn't had anybody close to Al Horford who he could go up against. But for the most part, I think that, when we say that getting Al Horford is going to be really good for Joel, that's kind of like a knock on Joel just because, he should be already doing the things that he should do to make sure that he's a better player. But I think that, in the locker room, those type of practice sessions are going to be phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a good point, Keith, right? It's almost like we have to break that down even further and say, what is he here to help with? Like, you shouldn't need to pay a guy $24 million a year to suggest, hey, you should eat better or you should work out better or smarter. But those practices, I mean, it's almost like what we thought Embiid was going to get out of those daily workouts with Noel before, it just didn't pan out, where it was like just sharpening your sword with a guy like Horford can I don't know, want to say wonders, but can improve his game. Can you see a ceiling increasing with Embiid outside of just him being on the floor and being healthier?
You know what? I really don't want to assume that. I'm not trying to be hard or something like that. It's just that, I just want to see Embiid do it. You know what I mean? And I know we can say this, but one thing I learned about, the Sixers, is that, when you assume stuff and when we assume everything that someone's going to do this and do that and they don't, then we're like, wow. So it's kind of like a wait and see for me. Like, I expect Joel Embiid, like, even if they didn't, I mean, what I mean is by with Al Horford, even if they didn't have Al Horford, after last year, you would think that Embiid would take a look in the mirror and, so to speak, and say, you know what, I really got to go to the next level. I know that I'm one of the most dominant players in the league. Now it's all about me to kick my bad habits and become, a great guy. I think that if you have to have Al Horford come on your team and do certain things for you to get better, then that's bad on you. You know what I mean? So, where it is going to be a bonus, I would hate for it to be just because they got another 5-time All-Star on the team.
What is your fair expectation of Ben Simmons' advancement of his offensive game between now and next season?
Kind of. I think he will improve, but again, it's kind of like the last question. It's all up to Ben. Last year, I kind of thought Ben was going to improve last year. I was, this time everyone was saying, hey, what do you think? And I was saying, hey, I think Ben is going to go out there and attempt shots. But again, it's up to Ben Simmons. Everything is up to him. It's hard for me to come out and give expectations on that one because, like, again, I said last year I thought he was going to improve and he didn't.
Keith, real quick, couple of things that popped. Just wanted to get your reaction on this. And we're chatting with Keith Pompey. According to Woj, this is like, 10 minutes ago, the Sixers and Ben have reached that agreement on the 5-year extension. So your reaction to that as far as what we thought was going to happen, but now it's finally happening and the Sixers committing long-term to Ben?
I mean, like, you knew it was going to happen. I mean, here's the thing. Ben Simmons was the first overall pick, right? Mm-hmm. He was an all-star. They don't have Jimmy Butler anymore. I mean, I think that this is more procedural. It was one of those things that, I mean, it's big for it to come out. Don't get me wrong, it is. But I think to a man, we all expected this to happen. We just all expected it to happen. So, the thing is, what it is like whatever, like Ben, typically a guy like this, they always want to get their first huge paycheck. This is the first huge paycheck. And then from there, you branch off and you do whatever you want. Like maybe a couple years later, for a team, let's just say if the Sixers want to trade Ben Simmons down the road, that's one of those things where, hey, right now they have his right. or another team knows that he'll be here for 4 years. So you can take a gamble on him as opposed to saying, okay, I'm going to trade for this guy next year, and then he could walk out the door and become, a free agent. For Ben, it just gives him the security too. So, there are certain instances where you hear of guys who say, they declined it and they took a 1-year deal and they never made that money up. Look at Nerlens Noel. He turned down money, his extension, and then next thing you know, Nerlens been, he's going to have his second consecutive 1-year deal for a minimum. So,
right.
You can't make that gamble.
Hey, Keith, man, appreciate you jumping on. Enjoy the rest of your summer. I know we got Summer League right now, and then pretty soon camp will be started up again, man.
Thanks, Keith.
All right. Thanks, man. Bye-bye.
There he is, Keith Pompey on the Lighthouse Insurance guest line.